New Zealand, Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. Two islands at the edge of the world, one of the last places settled by humans. Shaped by plate tectonics, volcanoes, mountains, rivers, isolation, war, indigenous and colonial history, invention and reinvention. This is the history of New Zealand. Part 1. Pre-human New Zealand. New Zealand as we know it today has been floating mostly alone in the Pacific for millions of years. Prior to this, the mostly submerged Zealandia was alongside Australia, Africa, Antarctica, and South America in the supercontinent known as Gondwana. Approximately 80 million years ago, a portion of Gondwana broke off, mostly submerged deep in the ocean, and began drifting deep into isolation. This isolation created one of the most unique and strangest ecosystems on the planet. No land mammals, aside from bats, would call this place home. There were no deer, no cows, no squirrels, rabbits, or rats. Birds completely dominated the ecosystem. Gigantic moa birds towered 10 feet tall, while Haast eagles hunted their prey and were one of the island's apex predators. They were descended from the dinosaurs, and these birds evolved uniquely to their environment. Another dinosaur descendant, the Tatara lizard, also survived and carved their niche in this harsh mountainous world. No bipedal mammal would step foot onto Aotearoa until sometime in the 1200s CE. Over 1,000 years after Jesus of Nazareth, no human had yet stepped foot on either of these majestic islands. Part 2. Maori arrival. The first humans to step foot onto New Zealand were Polynesian navigators. They used massive seaworthy canoes called waka canoes. The Polynesians discovered many lands throughout many generations in these canoes, and one of these lands were the islands of New Zealand. Their exact navigational skills are not known, but some of the evidence we have suggests they used the stars, had understandings of ocean currents and winds, followed bird migrations, and likely had immense levels of bravery and a great yearning for discovery to traverse the vast waters they navigated. The descendants of these explorers on the shores of New Zealand became the Maori people. Legend has it the explorer Kupe discovered the islands after following a giant octopus across the ocean. While the story is likely folklore, it is almost certain that following wildlife migrations helped the Polynesians discover new lands. The cuckoo and other marine life have predictable navigation patterns, which the Polynesians were very familiar with. Upon settling New Zealand, it was named Aotearoa, which roughly translates to the land of the long white cloud. The Maori people eventually developed complex networks of tribes and sub-tribes called iwi and hapu respectively. They developed their own relations involving direct ancestry, warfare, trade, and alliance networks centered around fortified settlements called pa. Over time, these tribes and sub-tribes developed their own traditions and spiritual practices tied to land, ancestors, and the natural world. The distinct Maori tattoo and rich woodcarving traditions blossomed shortly after these tribal societies became established and developed their own histories. While an idyllic place, there was no utopia on Aotearoa. Competition between tribes for resources and control led to frequent warfare, and native wildlife was devastated. Moa birds became extinct within a few centuries of their arrival, and many other plants and animals perished in a similar fashion. Despite this, the Maori civilization held on for hundreds of years until one day, boats of Europeans appeared on the horizon. Part 3. European arrival. In 1642, about 400 years after the Maori arrival, Dutch explorer Abel Tasman became the first non-Polynesian to reach New Zealand, and his arrival did not go smoothly. Tasman's crew and the local Maori had some sort of disagreement, and several of the crew were killed. Tasman and his remaining crew quickly fled, but did give the islands their existing namesake, naming them after the Dutch province of Zeeland, naming it New Zealand. For over 100 years after this encounter, Europeans largely stayed clear of the islands, until explorer James Cook reached the islands in 1769, where no surviving Maori from the previous European encounter was there to remember the first arrival. Cook had better luck with the Maori people, spending months contacting and interacting with them while he mapped the islands in extensive detail during his voyages for the Royal Navy. Despite months of contact, not all encounters were peaceful. There were violent encounters with some tribes, leaving both Maori and Europeans dead. Even with the violence, Cook's reports did transform the ideas of New Zealand in the minds of Europeans, and soon after his voyages came different people of all sorts, some whalers and sealers, missionaries and traders, and settlers looking to call the island home. As with many European contacts during this point in history, firearms came with them. Part 4. Muskets and the Musket Wars. The Musket Wars were a series of intertribal conflicts fought among the Maori-Iri between roughly 1818 and 1840, sparked by the introduction of European muskets. The first evidence of how firearms could change warfare came at the Battle of Momunai around 1807, where the Ngāpuhi, despite possessing few muskets, were defeated by the Ngāti Wata, while their guns were slow to reload. Humiliated, the Ngāpuhi chief, Hangaika, traveled to Britain in 1820, acquired hundreds of firearms through trade, and returned to launch a devastating campaign across the North Island. His victories at battles in 1821 and 1822 demonstrated the advantage of massive stores of firearms against traditional Maori fortifications and tactics. News of Hangihiha's success spread, and nearly every iwi sought to obtain muskets through trade with European merchants. This triggered an arms race that expanded the conflict across the two islands. One of the era's most influential leaders was, I've butchered pronunciation enough, I'm just going to put this name on screen, whose migration south reshaped the political landscape. His campaigns culminated in the capture of Kaiapoi-Pa in 1831 after months of siege, followed by the massacre at Onawe Peninsula, where hundreds of Ngāti were killed or enslaved. Another decisive battle came at around 1825, where Hangihiha finally defeated Ngāti Watua in revenge for the earlier defeat at Momunai. By the 1830s, however, muskets had become common among nearly all major iwi, eliminating the technological advantage that had fueled the wars. The fighting gradually subsided as tribes shifted their focus towards trade with Europeans and recovered from decades of conflict. Historians estimate that as many as 20,000 people were killed and tens of thousands more displaced or enslaved, permanently altering tribal boundaries and demographics throughout New Zealand. The Musket Wars also inspired the development of more sophisticated and fortified pa, which would later prove highly effective during the New Zealand Wars against British and colonial forces, while the instability they created helped pave the way for increasing British intervention and the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. Part 5. British Control. By the late 1830s, growing numbers of British settlers, traders, missionaries, and whalers had established themselves in New Zealand. While the British government became increasingly concerned about lawlessness and the possibility that another European power, particularly France, might attempt to annex the islands. At the same time, the aftermath of the Musket Wars had destabilized many regions, prompting some Maori chiefs to seek stronger relationships with Britain for trade, protection, and stability. In response, the British government appointed William Hobson as consul and instructed him to negotiate an agreement that would establish British authority while recognizing Maori rights. On February 6, 1840, Hobson and more than 40 Maori chiefs signed the Treaty of Waitangi at Waitangi in the Bay of Islands. Over the following months, copies of the treaty were taken throughout the country, and eventually more than 500 chiefs signed. In the English version, Maori ceded sovereignty to the British Crown in exchange for guarantees that they would retain ownership of their lands, forests, fisheries, and other properties unless they chose to sell them to the Crown. The treaty also extended rights and protections of British subjects to the Maori. However, the Maori language version had translation issues, which did not correlate one-to-one with the terms in the English version, especially terms like governorship and authority over land and internal affairs. These differences in translations created fundamentally different understandings of the agreement. Following the treaty, Britain formally proclaimed sovereignty over the North Island by treaty and over the South Island and Stewart Island by right of discovery, arguing that the few permanent settlements existed there beyond scattered Maori communities. New Zealand was initially administered as part of the colony of New South Wales before becoming a separate British colony later in 1840. While the Treaty of Waitangi remains New Zealand's founding document, disagreements over its meaning, particularly regarding sovereignty and land ownership, soon led to disputes between Maori and the colonial government. Those tensions eventually erupted into the New Zealand Wars, and the treaty continues to play a central role in New Zealand's law, politics, and efforts to address historical grievances. Part 6. The New Zealand Wars. The New Zealand Wars were a series of conflicts fought in the mid-1800s, primarily through the 1840s and 1870s, between the British Empire, colonial militia forces, and various Maori iwi. Although the Treaty of Waitangi was intended to establish British governance while protecting Maori land rights, disagreements over its meaning, particularly sovereignty and land ownership, quickly led to conflict. As European settlement expanded, the colonial government sought to acquire increasing amounts of native land, often through disputed purchases or confiscation. Major fighting occurred in the Northern War, 1845 to 1846, when Chief Hunheki repeatedly cut down the British flagstaff, symbolically challenging British authority and sparking open warfare. During the 1860s, the wars continued to intensify as disputes over land purchases continued to escalate. Fighting erupted in Taranaki after the controversial purchase of the Waitara block, leading to the First and Second Taranaki Wars. The conflict soon spread into Waikato, where Governor George Grey launched an invasion in 1863, suppressing the Maori King movement, which sought to unify Maori tribes and resist further land sales. Although British and colonial forces possessed superior numbers and resources, Maori fighters proved highly effective by constructing sophisticated and fortified pa. Battles such as Gate Pa in 1864 became famous for stunning British defeats, demonstrating the ingenuity of Maori defensive tactics, despite their eventual strategic disadvantage. Eventually, by the early 1870s, organized resistance had largely been defeated, though certain leaders continued guerrilla campaigns for several years. In the aftermath of the wars, the colonial government confiscated more than 3 million acres of Maori land, devastating the economic and social foundations of many iwi. These conflicts firmly established British control over New Zealand while leaving a legacy of displacement, resentment, and legal disputes over land that continues to influence New Zealand today. The New Zealand Wars are now recognized as a defining chapter in the nation's history, shaping modern discussions about the Treaty of Waitangi, Maori rights, and historical reconciliation. Part 7. A Better Britain. By the late 19th century, New Zealand had cultivated an international reputation as a better Britain, a society that retained British traditions while pushing ambitious social and political reforms. Its economy prospered through sheep farming, refrigerated exports of meat and dairy to Britain, and the growth of modern cities and infrastructure. The colony also became known for progressive legislation. In 1893, New Zealand became the first self-governing nation in the world to grant women the right to vote in national elections, following years of campaigning led by Kate Shepherd and the women's suffrage movement. These achievements helped promote New Zealand as a model society that combined British values with democratic innovation and a high standard of living. However, this image of a better Britain largely reflected the experience of the European settler population, rather than the Maori. Following the New Zealand Wars, the colonial government confiscated millions of acres of Maori land, undermining the economic independence of many iwi and accelerating European settlement. Government policies encouraged the assimilation of Maori into British culture, while the Maori language and many traditional customs were discouraged in schools and public life. Although some Maori participated in the colony's political institutions, they generally did not share equally in the prosperity and opportunities celebrated by the settlers. As a result, the vision of New Zealand as a better Britain was built alongside the dispossession and marginalization of its indigenous people, a legacy that the country continues to address through Treaty of Waitangi settlements and broader efforts at reconciliation. Part 8: World Wars and the Gradual Independence of New Zealand. New Zealand's national identity began to crystallize during the First World War, when it fought not just as a British colony, but as a direct, distinct national force within the wider empire. The most defining moment probably came in the 1915 Gallipoli campaign against the Ottoman Empire, where New Zealand troops fought alongside Australian forces as part of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. While the campaign was a clear military failure, the shared experience of endurance and sacrifice, as well as high casualties, became a foundational national myth. Gallipoli in particular marked a psychological turning point. New Zealanders increasingly saw themselves as a separate people with their own identity, rather than simply British subjects in the Pacific on a few small islands. During World War II, New Zealand again fought alongside Britain and the Allied powers, but its military actions did reinforce its independent international identity. New Zealand forces served in a couple different theaters, including North Africa, in Italy, and of course in the Pacific. In the Pacific War, New Zealand contributed to operations against Japan, while also helping defend the region alongside the US and Australia as Britain's global power waned. These experiences deepened New Zealand's strategic ties beyond Britain and reinforced its role as a small but independent actor in global affairs. The war also accelerated social and economic change at home, strengthening national institutions and increasing the sense that New Zealand's future security decisions could not rely solely on Britain. After the World Wars, New Zealand's political independence continued to evolve gradually rather than through a single rupture. It had already become a dominion in 1907, but constitutional dependence on Britain persisted until the mid-20th century. A key milestone was the adoption of the Statute of Westminster in 1931, which New Zealand actually did not accept until 1947, almost 2 decades later. However, from that point onward, it gained full legislative sovereignty, making its formal independence in constitutional terms. Over time, this legal autonomy, combined with wartime experience and growing regional engagement to solidify New Zealand's modern identity as an independent nation, closely tied to Britain historically, but increasingly oriented toward its own Pacific and global relationships. Part 9: Modern New Zealand. Modern New Zealand is a highly developed, stable democracy shaped by both its colonial British inheritance and its indigenous Maori foundations. Its political system operates as a parliamentary democracy with strong institutions, an independent judiciary, and a constitutional framework rooted in British common law, but increasingly shaped by the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. Through the work of the Waitangi Tribunal, many historical grievances related to land confiscation and colonial policy have been formally investigated, leading to settlements, financial redress, and increased recognition of Maori rights. At the same time, Maori language and culture have undergone a major revival, becoming visible in education, media, public signage, and national ceremonies. This dual identity, Maori and Pakeha being a European New Zealander, is now central to how the country understands itself. Economically and culturally, New Zealand is a small but globally connected nation with a strong agricultural base, major tourism industry, and growing reputation in film, technology, and environmental policy. It is widely associated with environmental conservation and political independence, especially after becoming a nuclear-free state in the 1980s, a policy that signaled a more autonomous foreign policy stance. Culturally, it balances rural lifestyles and traditional farming with modern cities like Auckland and Wellington, while also projecting its identity through international sport, especially the New Zealand national rugby team, as well as global media such as Lord of the Rings, which has made New Zealand instantly identifiable. Overall, modern New Zealand reflects a nation still working through its history while confidently expressing a distinct identity in the Pacific and the wider world. From isolated volcanic islands to Polynesian settlement to colonization, resistance, and reinvention, the story of New Zealand is the story of survival and transformation. It is a nation that is still wrestling with its past, still defining itself, and still standing at the edge of the Pacific, shaped by ancient geology, ancient tradition, and modern change. Thank you for watching the story of New Zealand.